With the Oilers on their longest losing streak of the season, who else to play with the potential to lose 5 in a row than the Florida Panthers? This should be fun.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. That's Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers. I'm Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers. We want to thank everyone who's making our show their first listen of the day. Both of our shows are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So on today's show, we're going to do our first segment. We're going to talk general, just kind of where our teams are at in the standings, recent form. Our second segment, Armando has 2 questions. I don't know what they are, and I have 2 questions for Armando that I don't know what they are about our respective teams to kind of give you guys a little bit more of color and deeper meaning. And then our final segment, we have a little bit more open-ended general conversation stuff coming out of Four Nations, more news, topical stuff. So Armando, my friend, how are we doing?
Doing well. I'm glad to once again connect with you for another crossover here. And to think that I do have a little bone to pick with the NHL on this matchup, because this was originally supposed to be a nationally televised game on ESPN Plus, but they took it off of this one and put it back to local television. But the NHL did make it up to the Florida Panthers by giving them a nationally televised game against the Toronto Maple Leafs down the line. So I wish the national audience got to see this one for this matchup.
So with that in mind, the big story for this game from the Oilers perspective is this is the longest losing streak the Oilers have been on all year. They lost the last game before the Four Nations face-off break to Colorado. They've lost 3 in a row since returning. The goaltending has looked stunningly bad. It's been like Cinderella's carriage turned back into a pumpkin, but like on steroids, how bad it's been over the last week and a half. The conversation around going out to get a goalie ahead of next week's trade deadline is only getting louder. You have the general manager saying, we like our goaltending. A lot of Oiler fans are very worried right now, Armando.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like at times when it comes to Edmonton Oilers, we're just sometimes repeating the same conversation. I remember we were discussing before the first matchup between these two teams about the rough start that Edmonton had, and you can't repeat the same things as far as firing the coach and doing the same thing in regarding that. And I mean, although Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins have picked things up after the beginning of the season, I mean, it's still not up to par from what they were doing last season. So I can see why there's so much frustration with Edmonton on their side of things.
And it's weird because to the average person, if you went and pulled up the NHL standings for the whole league right now, you know who has the 7th most points of any team in the entire league? That would be the Edmonton Oilers, who have 1 less point than the Florida Panthers. And yet we're sitting here, and the conversation I'm hearing is that the team is in dire straits, that, this is season altering type trajectory. And it's hard to tell fans, hey, take a deep breath. It's just a bad week. But everything they have done up until this point would lead you to believe they are at least an above average team. The way I try and describe it, and what I said on yesterday's show, was when you go on a losing streak, everything that seems bad about your team is amplified by 10. And that's really the key to moderating yourself in a long season, is remembering when you go on a really good stretch, you're probably not as good as that good stretch, and you're not as bad as the bad stretch. I mean, the Oilers have a suspect record against playoff teams this year, but they are not in real trouble.
Yeah, and I think the reason why the noise is so much is because of the fact that it's, the whole story of what happens with the being 1 goal away from forcing overtime, and then knowing the fact of what's coming up with the bill being due for them with Draisaitl's contract extension kicking in, what's going to be the status of McDavid, even though I do believe he's going to resign, and then Bouchard being an RFA. So I can understand why the noise is, and the sense of urgency for them might be to do something to bolster their lineup for them.
So as we sit here ahead of the second game, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the first time these two teams played was about as close as you're going to get to getting punched in the face watching a hockey game on TV. And it kind of feels like piling on that they've lost 4 in a row. And who do they have to play? Their biggest boogeyman, arguably, because through the first 35, 40 minutes of their first matchup, the Oilers played pretty well. The Oilers came storming back. They got out to a lead. And then Florida kind of leaned forward in their chair and kind of locked in, and it was a really bad snowball effect. I mean, I still think about how hard Stuart Skinner sulked his shoulders after that last goal he let in, because that goal had no business going in. That's how off guard he was. You know, it ricocheted off the back of his helmet and went in, and he sulked his shoulders, the lowest I've ever seen a goalie sulk their shoulders after conceding a goal.
Yeah, and Sam Reinhart from that sharp angle for him, and then that's still to this day for the Panthers their only win of the season when trailing going into the third period for them. And then Carter Verhaeghe, who's mostly struggled this season with that game winner for them to end it at 6-5. And speaking of Verhaeghe and the Panthers and going and kind of like turning it to like where the Florida Panthers are at, I mean, lost their first matchup out of the Four Nations face-off, and for them. Missing Matthew Tkachuk at the moment for them, and they look like a team that was kind of tired. Although they peppered Joey Daccord with shots, it wasn't. They struggled with getting the second chances. Although they did get a break in the schedule with not having a back-to-back, their next back-to-back coming March 15th and 16th. That's a scheduling luxury for the Panthers, and no more games outside of the Eastern time zone for them after Tuesday's matchup for them. And Carter Verhaeghe, even before the Four Nations break, he was hot. He came in hot. Four goals in 2 games on a back-to-back against Chicago and the New York Islanders, including a hat trick for him. So and even before the Four Nations break, Matthew Tkachuk was scoring in 6 games in a row for him. So he was on a little bit of a hot streak. So I mean, did the break maybe disrupt things for the Panthers? Maybe, but everyone, Nick, in the division has won at least 6 of in the top 3 of the division as far as Toronto, Tampa Bay, and Florida. They've won at least 6 of their last 10. So nobody's creating separation in the Atlantic Division, which creates such a great race for the top. As far as not only have they created so much separation for them, but you look at the wild card race for what's going on with Detroit, Ottawa, and I mean that Stadium Series this coming Saturday. It's going to mean something, which is great when you're considering looking at everything, not just for the Florida Panthers, but outside of them as well.
As far as the Panthers' outlook, would you say the fact that they have had the playoff success over the last handful of seasons makes it to the point that, I don't want to say the regular season is academic, but they're kind of in the same boat that Vegas is in now? You could say what Tampa Bay's in now, where they're not going through the motions, but they know as long as they make the playoffs, that's the goal. And once they get there, that's where they kind of dial it in, because it feels like they're still kind of ironing some things out. I know the fun conversation that I've been having with my analytics friends is, can we get Erik Karlsson onto the Panthers somehow to replace Brandon Montour? And it's like, that kind of feels like what they need. It kind of feels like they're just waiting for the deadline to make their one big move. And then once the playoffs start, they're a scary team in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's all going to depend what goes on with Matthew Tkachuk's status with LTIR for them. That's the only way you're going to fit Erik Karlsson into the mix for the Florida Panthers here in the books. And he does have term for him. And hey, it's a right-handed shot who can work a power play for them. And right now the power play has actually been decent with Aaron Ekblad running the point for them. So, and although I don't believe it's a long-term solution, that would be one heck of a trade that the Florida Panthers could pull off, because I mean, there's the rumor mill for Erik Karlsson is growing more and more. I mean, it's also growing for Seth Jones. I mean, Elliot Friedman repeated himself from what he said on 32 Thoughts on the Panthers being a team that could be a destination. So that's another thing for the Panthers on just the fact that they have been a destination, on just how they're able to just even if the guys don't end up with the Panthers, that they're reportedly in on guys. And hey, for the Panthers, I mean, going back to your question on just going through the motions for them, they haven't lost back-to-back regulations games since late December. And in the middle of that was a little bit of the Christmas break where they came off a matinee game. It was Jakub Dobish's NHL debut for the Montreal Canadiens on a matinee where the Panthers were at home and eating a whole bunch of Christmas food and probably drinking a little. So that was a game that they didn't show up for them. but also for the Panthers, it's just never getting too low whenever things go wrong. And even Spencer Knight, when answering the questions to the media on Tuesday in his win against Nashville, he doesn't really look at trends too much as far as going through stretches. It's just focusing on the present moment for him. So that's the mentality that's just been trickled down from top to bottom for the Panthers.
And that's the sign of a good team. I've been saying that all year, especially through the first, up until about January, where the Oilers really couldn't string together, 2-3 wins in a row. A good team stays level the entire season. You never get too high, you never get too low, and that keeps you at a nice even keel that allows you to respond to adversity. We have to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we are going to have our mystery question round, so be sure to stick around. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't hacking it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee's next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they will handpick the personal match for you. They have a quiz where in under a minute they can match you to a roast that is fresh, smelled incredible, and tasted even better. The subscription makes it so easy. No more last-minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever's in the pantry. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off their first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first offer. drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here with Armando and I on this crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. Armando, I throw the floor to you. What is your first question about the Oilers?
My question about them is just where things stand as far as I know I mentioned in the first segment really about the sense of urgency for them to try to win something this year for them. And it really, when Stan Bowman took over and then you saw the offer sheet situation with Broberg and Holloway, they make the trade for Matthew Savoie, who has played a few games now. He's on Draisaitl's wing. Okay, and then you bring in Jess Skinner off that buyout from Buffalo. But the problem there is, although it's a 1-year deal, there's a no move clause in it. He seemed to have found himself a little bit out of the rotation for the Edmonton Oilers there. So it's just like where do things go from here when it comes to just continuously trying to supply the lineup when it comes to just the forward? Because once again, it's just when you think about the lack of production from Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins for this season. I mean, Rachel Dorier does have as far as guys who they could look out after is Ryan Donato and Brock Besser. They have to look at guys on expiring deals, and that's kind of the tough part for them. It's not a team that could really look for terms. So where is your headspace when it comes to just where they can go here?
That's a great question. Evander Kane is lingering over all of this as well, and I know it was reported today. I think Darren Dreger said it on radio in Toronto that the Oilers don't think they're going to have that LTIR money, meaning that Evander Kane is going to return to play at some point before the end of the regular season, which really throws a monkey wrench in any potential sizable additions without sending money out. I know they could hypothetically trade Evander Kane, but you'd be very curious to see what the market is for a player who hasn't played in 10 months, who has, I think, 2 years remaining on his deal at like $5.5 million per year. He doesn't have full no trade protection anymore. It's down to 16 teams. So hypothetically, half of the league could potentially acquire him, but they have too many forwards to begin with. As you mentioned, they've had Skinner rotate in and out a few times. They called up Savoie for the second time this year, and he's gotten a little bit of burn, but going down that left side, you have Nugent-Hopkins, you have Podkolzin, you have Janmark, and you have the aforementioned, you have Savoie, who's played on the right and the left. You have Skinner. You have a Vander Kane who could potentially be back in the mix, and you're talking about, 6 guys for 4 spots, unless you want to play someone on their off wing. But what does that do to Victor Arvidsson, Zach Hyman, or whomsoever you want to talk about down the right side, Corey Perry as well, and Connor Brown? They have too many forwards for not enough spots, and very clearly, there's just something about Jeff Skinner's game that Chris Knobloch hasn't taken a liking to. If you go and look under the hood, Jeff Skinner's got good underlying numbers. The Oilers are winning his minutes. They're controlling the puck. It's just something about the way Jeff Skinner plays that Knobloch just doesn't feel comfortable with for whatever reason. And they also, you mentioned Savoie, and John Klingberg falls in this box as well, who they brought in at the end of January. Mm-hmm. Him and Savoie getting a little bit of run in February. This is kind of auditioning because, if they feel good about Savoie, maybe they won't go out and add a forward, and ditto with Klingberg, where if they feel like he's good enough, they won't go out and acquire another defenseman, even though I'd argue they probably need a defenseman really pressingly. I mean, they claimed Travis Dermott off of waivers today and sent him down to the AHL immediately, so we'll see what becomes of that. But my first question for you is, which position group do you think the Panthers need to bolster the most ahead of the trade deadline? Is it on the back end or is it up front?
I still think it's right-handed D for them for where they can go. I've talked about guys like Henry Jokiharju, David Savard. David Savard's more like a guy who could be on the third pair. Jokiharju getting some run at the Four Nations. So maybe some conversation with Barkov on possibly them being possible teammates coming up for them. And those are expiring deals for their respective teams. But hey, the fact that there's a possibility of LTIR space, which is still the question for what they could do in this, is just guys also with term like Luke Shen, who's a big body who could throw lay hits. Rasmus Ristolainen, although he missed the Four Nations due to injury. Connor Murphy are other guys who could actually help out the Panthers as far as guys who could possibly get into the mix. Those are guys with term, and hey, those are even if their respective teams don't retain salary, that they're in a position to at least with the salary cap going up to at least keep some guys on the cheap for them. But if you can get Ristolainen or Murphy with retained salary, man, does that increase their chances to really bolster their D even in the off season, even though we're still really focused on this season for the Panthers.
So it feels kind of moot to talk about the Panthers big picture without Matthew Tkachuk. Any team missing one of their best players any team missing one of their best players is going to have a tall order in the postseason. But the one word of assurance I would give you is that's a really veteran laden group. You've got a really good head coach, and he knows how to push the buttons to get the most out of guys in the right situations. And it's really, that's a good feeling to have, where your coach is going to be able to get the most out of something. That's what everyone wants from their head coach, regardless of the sport. Can you push the right buttons and coach just a little bit more out of your guys?
Yeah, and thankfully, a lot of leaders on the team, Barkov, Reinhart, Sam Bennett is 1 goal away from a 20-goal season, so he's been definitely stepping up. I'm just interested to see how someone like Carter Verhaeghe, although he's struggled a bit this season, of how he carries through for this one, and how a guy like Mackie Samoskevich continues to fit into the top 6 for them. But the next question I have with you, Frank Saravelli spoke with Stan Bowman recently, and this was before the losing streak for the Oilers, on just the status of goaltending for them, and just whether they're going to go trade for one. And he said no at the time. And then there's also been discussion of just John Gibson. Is he going to be an Edmonton Oiler? Is he going to be a Carolina Hurricane? What's going to happen there? But he's hurt again. That's the thing so that doesn't help things for his cause on trying to get out of Anaheim. So but also it's with Stuart Skinner. I mean, you want to also put some confidence there for him, but also there's also discussion on just play around him, on just with the fact that Edmonton is like fast-paced team, so you're going to get a lot of shots against, so you're going to be under a lot of pressure. So how is that situation defensively seen?
I wish I had a good answer for you. My My logic as a sports fan tells me that Stan Bowman has no incentive to be honest with Frank Saravelli. It's not in his interest to come out and say, we need a goalie, because if he does that, teams are just going to give him a harder time trying to get one. But at the same time, Frank generally has a decent line of contact to organizations, and it's plausible. And you got to say the right things. You mentioned Stuart Skinner and his confidence. You don't want to jack that up, because eventually, even if it's as soon as next season, you're going to have to figure out your goalie room again. Calvin Pickard is fine for what he is, the backup on a good team, but this team's not winning anything because of their goaltending. We all know that. It's if the team in front of them is good enough where they don't have to do a whole lot, you can win pretty consistently. But as we've seen over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, when the team in front of them isn't great, the margin for victory is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, no doubt. And we've seen Stuart Skinner stand on his head. I mean, we've seen also how outstanding that the penalty kill for the Edmonton Oilers, just giving up 4 power play goals against during that playoff run. It was just difficult for just teams to get through them, and just how. And hey, once again, I'm a big fan of Matthias Ekholm on just how he conducts himself as a veteran, and just how he's able to just bully people on the boards for him, and just how. And just and a veteran on that group. But hey, there's still those questions on what Bouchard can do defensively outside of just being a 100-point man.
That sets me up nicely for the question I'm going to ask, but I'm going to do it in our final segment because it ties into one of the things I wanted to talk about over there. We will be right back, so be sure to stick around.
But first, we're going to tell you guys all about FanDuel. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Armando and I here on this crossover edition. So the question I had is tied into the Matthew Tkachuk stuff, the Four Nations face-off stuff. Are you, as a Panthers person, it feels a little heavy-handed to ask this question, but do you understand why him, Brady, and a lot of those guys were willing to play in that game kind of not at 100%, even though, we all know this is a made-up tournament. This isn't the Olympics. This isn't even a World Cup of hockey. Do you get it? Or do you kind of feel as a Panther fan like, Matthew, love you, but we could go back-to-back if you're healthy?
I said it. I said it quite a few times that the Panthers owe Matthew Tkachuk for everything, for them trading for him and then changing the identity of the team. So I was very okay with even after he got hurt the first time and say, hey, do it for your country. You're going to miss some time, and then come back healthy for him. So, and the fact that for Matthew Tkachuk also, he's also taking this time during his time out of just growing the game. I recently spoke about him on the appearance on Jimmy Fallon. I previewed a little bit of his appearance of what he was going to do with him and his brother on New Heights with Travis and Jason Kelce, which he spoke a bunch about just the fights, growing up in an NHL locker room, and then just who would win in a fight between him, Walt, and Brady, and who are the favorites in the family, and then just the overall chirps. It's just the amount of personality we've seen through these two guys has just been something that's just so great for the NHL, in my opinion. And I'm just as a Panthers person, I'm just glad to cover a guy like this every single day. So, going back to Four Nations and just personalities and just guys being on full display. I mean, the torch has been passed in Canadian hockey with the game-winning goal to Connor McDavid, and just although I was cheering for the USA, I kind of gave a few claps when I said, "Wow, that was just pure greatness on full display." This is a legend should." should have the chance to win at every level. If it's not Connor McDavid against the Florida Panthers, I want to see him lift the cup. I want to see legends get rewarded, and to see that with so many new fans getting in on the game of hockey, I was just like, wow, what better way to introduce some new fans in just that being passed on. So my question for you is, how much has McDavid's legacy was solidified just getting that golden goal?
I think for him personally, he would tell you it was a cool moment, but I'm trying to win a Stanley Cup. And I think next year, I think the Olympics will matter a lot more.
No doubt.
You saw that these guys took this seriously, that a lot of guys took this as kind of an audition for the Olympics, if you will, of if I have a good tournament here, this will really help my case as far as making the team next year. As far as what it means, it's a cool moment. It's something I'll always remember. Like you said, I was rooting for the States to win. I picked Canada to win on Locked On NHL on the Thursday, the morning of, just because they have the guys, man. You get into those big game environments and big experience gap between Team USA and Team Canada, especially when you look at the playoff games played. Canada had like 600 something more playoff games played between
14 cups.
14 cups versus I think USA had 3 or 4. Really big experience gap. And the biggest thing I'm happy about is the hockey was good. It got really high quality hockey in front of people who don't regularly watch it. And even if you got 5 people who were casually excited by that and wanted to watch, the Oilers play the Capitals, whatever it was, I think it was Saturday of last weekend. That's the point of international hockey. We're trying to get you in the door. That way you can become one of us who knows how fast Connor Brown skates in a straight line. That's why you want to know how fast Henry Jokiharju can skate. Then you start getting involved. That's kind of the goal of international hockey, and it's good it's back. It is really important that it's back because it was good for everyone involved. Even, look, Matthew Tkachuk himself would tell you he has no regrets about playing in that game, not feeling 100%, and that's how you know it mattered.
Yeah, no doubt. And the fact that so many players have been deprived of this for 9 years. I mean, you think of Team Sweden, you're not seeing Henrik Lundqvist between the pipes anymore. It's been transitioned now for Team Sweden. So the passing of legends going into the next wave of them for the entirety of the league. So that's another great thing that new fans and a new generation are getting into for this game. And I think that's just, and even for, and I'm interested to see what the new fan is going to did when it came to seeing a name and then just opening up a tab and then just saying, okay, they play for this, and just trying to connect the dots on just their history for where they were traded and traded or left in free agency. I mean, that was something that I did in the early 2010s when I was starting to watch the sport for the first time, and just trying to connect the dots and just trying to catch up. I'm trying to see. I'm wondering to see how many people are trying to do that currently, and just so that they could also fit in for this sport.
And the cool thing about it is you have guys representing a bunch of different teams across the league. I know there were a handful of teams that didn't have guys who got picked for any of the 4 teams, but you got Matthew, who's from the Panthers, you got Brady, who's from the Senators, you got Jack from the Devils, you got Matthews from the Leafs. Even if you're only getting surface level interest, that matters. The NHL is always going to have people like us lunatics. We will always be here no matter what. But you can't grow the sport without the casual fan who, if they're at a bar or a restaurant and the game's on and they go, oh, I know who that is. You forge that connection. You got to get that casual fan. Casual fans are the majority of fans. You think about that how a pyramid is shaped. That's the majority. Most of the people who watch a given sport are casual. There are only so many of us who invest the time to care to the degree we do. And that's okay. The casual fan is an important part of the ecosystem.
And I think of Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final for regardless of result of what happened there, because the NBA was over, the draft, the NFL was in the middle of their offseason, OTAs was over for them. So the spotlight for the entirety of the league was on that, and 16 million people watching that was also a great moment in the last calendar year as far as where where things were as far as just the attention it's getting. And once again, we're hoping that it just continues for the entirety of the league. And yeah, regardless of whether the Florida Panthers are the ones to do it again or to continue doing so, I mean, the league is right now in good hands. And to think that, here's another thing I have not mentioned yet. The fact that the PA and the commissioner's office are likely to get a new CBA done earlier based on this Four Nations face-off, that the likelihood of a lockout is less likely, in my opinion, than ever.
I'm going to knock on my desk just to be safe as an NHL fan, because we have seen good situations get messed up more than once, but you have to feel relatively good about the state of things. You know, the players are getting meaningful concessions that they want. The international play was a big deal for them that they really wanted, especially that executive committee, which is usually guys who have a lot of influence, who are older, a lot of experience. It matters. You know, and to wrap up on this, you know, we're going to get one real crack at Sid Connor and Nate Mack all on the same team in an Olympics, and that's it. That's it. We're only going to get to see that one time for Olympic gold. And I'll be curious to see where we're at in international hockey 4 or 5 years from now when we're talking about the 2030 Olympics. But man, it's hard not to feel like the NHL's in a good spot.
Yeah, and more Connor McDavid glory on that stage as well for him, because I think fans just deserve to see greatness on their television screens on such a big stage.
Hey, man, I haven't been as engaged in basketball as I was watching the Olympics last summer since I was like 15 or 16 years old. It's when you get those opportunities to watch LeBron, Katie, and Steph, and you get the young bucks like Devin Booker and you get Anthony Edwards, the guys, you know, that matters. That institutional knowledge you pass down about this is what it means to play for your country. You carry yourself a certain way. You put that maximum effort in. We're only going to get X amount of minutes because everyone's got to play unless you're Jason Tatum, but it matters. It matters. But that will do it for today's crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. I really hope, even if the Oilers don't win tonight, just play well. They haven't even played a decent game in like 2.5, 3 weeks. So even if they lose, as long as they play well, I think that's really all I need from them tonight. Just some progress. Because right now it feels like the building's on fire. Putting the fire out would be really nice. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. And Etu Luostarinen will return to the lineup for the Panthers after the birth of his child. Justin Sordiff, 1 game in, scores a goal, and then gets sent back to Charlotte. So good things are going on in Florida Panther land as far as guys getting in on the action, even though we're still waiting for everything as far as the news on Matthew Tkachuk.
Armando and I will talk to you guys again real soon. If we cross paths again in the playoffs, I don't know if my sanity can handle that, but we will definitely check in at some point over the summer if a Stanley Cup final rematch doesn't come to fruition. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.